Can you hear me? Hello? Okay.
Yo, how's it going? Oh, is this on?
Oh, it's on.
All right. So I'm going to have to go navigate that PowerPoint for a little while, and then I'll definitely sit down. But you said that's cool. All right. Oh, we're on. Okay. Thanks for coming.
Hello, my name is Clair, and I'm from Ilsibuktuk. And I'm here to do the importance of Indigenous-led media.
I'm Miles Howe, and I'm from originally from Ottawa, Ontario. Currently living in a trailer on top of a mountain overlooking the north shore of the Cobequid Bay. I feel very fortunate about that. Writing a book with Clair. Living off the grid with some solar panels, so it's pretty sweet. Living the dream.
It's amazing.
All right, let's get started. We're here to talk about a podcast series that I had the opportunity and the good fortune to be able to help produce with Annie. And, you know, I think just to begin, it just sort of, when we talk about media and we talk about activism and we talk about radical media, a lot of the times, like for myself, for example, I'm coming at it from an angle of, you know, not being an Indigenous person at all, but then sort of falling into a role and trying to be a good ally, trying to be a responsible journalist, but that really does only go so far. And I think a lot of times what happens is you wind up sort of, despite your best intentions, sort of falling into, you know, reporting on conflicts, for example, reporting on, and I'll definitely get into that in a minute, but the best thing I think we can do is sort of turn it around and hand the media back to, and then we circumvent these whole, like, how do we decolonize? And those are definitely important and vital conversations to be having, but how to decolonize the media, you know, it becomes kind of a no-brainer to just sort of like step back. But that involves a lot of ego getting out of the way too. So, yeah. So how'd you get started?
And how I got started, I was living in my community, like since I was a child. So when I first moved to Halifax, I was, before I moved to Halifax, I was working as a suicide prevention worker, a youth worker, and I worked for the restorative justice in my community. So I got involved in the anti-fracking that happened in New Brunswick. And that's when I started thinking that I need to do something after that happened in New Brunswick. And when I moved to Halifax, I said that I need to get involved in the media because I noticed that the only media that really was writing about the stories was Halifax Media Co-op. And the other medias that were writing about it were twisting the stories around. So for me, I said to myself, well, I have to get involved, and I have to be the one that's going to have to write the stories about my people. And I know that I'm not going to twist the story around, and that I'm going to write the truth about what's really going on. So that's how I got involved. And I was on unemployment. So I started thinking, where can I go? Who can I ask? How can I do it? So I went to the unemployment, and I told them what I wanted to do. And there was procedures that I had to follow and that I had to do things, and I said, okay, I'll do that, and I applied. And then the people at the unemployment gave me a hard time, saying that, oh, you don't have the education, and no, you can't do this, and you have to go back to school. And so I was going to school, but I stopped going to school, and I decided that I wanted to do this. And that's when I was having a problem with the unemployment and how I can start doing my my podcast. So I started working with the Halifax Media Co-op, and then they started giving me programs and projects that I can do. And then I started working with the CBC. He was working for the CBC before, so he was the one that was going to be training me. And that's how I ended up starting.
Just for a bit of context, like the Halifax Media Co-op is it remains sort of a grassroots organization. It's sustainer based. We also operate as our own worker co-op, like a not-for-profit co-op out of Nova Scotia. So we do have, a business registration number in which we can access programming and funding from Service Canada to employ people that are on unemployment or on employment insurance. And we had accessed that several times for different positions, and it's one of the ways that a grassroots organization can, keep people, get some training, and then also, creating content and paying properly for content is always an issue when you've got funding restrictions. So we had used these programs successfully with no problems several times in the past, and it was only with Annie that we ran into this really like top-down, definitely bureaucratic, racist situation where we wound up putting the guy on speakerphone and recording him, where he was just literally like, "No, Annie, you can't do this," and this same guy closed down this file three times, and actually was going and picking it off people's desks and like closing it down even when we had requested a new program officer. He had and so we're running into this wall of racism simply at the very get-go when we want to create a position for a Mi'kmaq language specific podcast was what we were aiming for. And it's just like literally people not appreciating that skill sets are not just in that Western colonial, like check the box, where in fact like Annie has the skill set as a fluent Mi'kmaq speaker of a vulnerable language, of a totally underserved community that has no programming whatsoever in the Maritimes, being in that language, being directed towards it. So that's just the next slide. I'll just make it dance here for me. So grassroots journalism, we have a fairly limited situation in the Maritimes. We do have New Brunswick Media Co-op. We do have the Halifax Media Co-op. We have some great bloggers, etc. But we also have something that I would term the Irving Wall of Silence, where one particular family owns all the print publications in New Brunswick, for example. It's a complete monopoly. There's also a decent degree of lack of education in the Maritimes. It's the few in terms of percentage wise, you're dealing with the least high school graduates in the country. You're also dealing with a population that is the most represented in the military, the most represented in oil sands work, stuff like this. So it's sort of if you perceive it a little bit as sort of the grunt workforce of Canada, and it's also the population that's been sort of the longest under that colonial nightmare that is Canada. So it's a population that many people came here as indentured Irish laborers, for example. So you're not necessarily dealing with a moneyed population. You're not necessarily dealing with a very strong immigrant population coming in and staying in the Maritimes. You're dealing with a stagnant and/or decreasing population across the board, and you're also dealing with an aging population where the youth are departing en masse, often for Western Canada, and so to do grassroots journalism in the Maritimes is sort of it presents its own kind of different dynamics. When you're looking at Mi'kmaq or Wolastoq language-based media, it's virtually non-existent, aside from some sporadic APTN specials or presentations, and even then what you're dealing with is video and high cost productions that we're not able to afford as a grassroots organization. You do have something like the Micmac News, but that's also English language based, and even with APTN, you have one designated APTN reporter for all of the Maritimes, and so that's also very underserviced. And then so what you see is reporting, by virtue of a lack of resources and let's call it the nature of the beast, is often you you go into conflict-driven situations because that's often what media does. And even as grassroots organizations, when we purport to give a wider context or give a historical and colonial context to these conflicts, even if you are coming there in sort of a notion that yes, they are justified, you're often creating a stereotype as well, and it's a well-intentioned parachute syndrome, and it also does lead to stereotypes. So there you have a guy with a parachute coming in. So I'll move back to the creation of this podcast, and I think you've talked a little bit about that, but if you want to talk any more about maybe why it was so important for you to be doing this and what you began to find, or...
Well, for me, the reason why I thought it was important that our people go out there and tell our stories, because in a way, our people have a trust issue, one thing, and that I knew that if I would have went and talked to my people, they would sit down and they would share with me, as then they would with him. So they open up more, and they speak the language, and I'm fluent in my language, so I would understand what they're saying. So that's why I feel that it's really important for me to do that, so that I can go to not just my community, but other communities. Because I find they communicate better in our language. And what else? And the thing, like I was talking about earlier, how I was having problems with Service Canada. I knew that the reason why they didn't want to help me because I was Native. And it really made me feel really, really bad. Just because I wasn't educated and that I didn't have a grade 12. And he kept telling me that, well, you don't have skills and you can't do this. So that really, really made me feel bad. So I told myself, well, it's all right away, me thinking it'll pass. We'll end up finding somebody that will help us and that won't be racist. So, but look at me now. I'm doing it. So that's over. That's done. And another thing, when I first thought about this, I wanted all to be in Mi'kmaq. Because the reason why I started, because I wanted to reach out to my people. Because my people, some of my people have lost their language through residential school. And I thought, well, if I do this podcast in Mi'kmaq, I can reach out to my people. And maybe then they'll be like, okay, I don't understand this podcast, but maybe I can learn my language again. Like to reach them, like, come on, you got to learn the language. You need to speak your language again. Get it back. You can do it. So now that I've been doing this, I've been reaching people, and they do want to learn their language back again to understand, and that there's nothing wrong with speaking our language, and that nobody's going to hurt you. What else?
So when we talk about decolonization, and that's it's a huge issue, and I know that you've been talking about that in your strategy sessions and different workshops, and sometimes again what we seem to overlook is when simply hand the media back. And so a media project where you have a host such as Annie prioritizing issues of being Indigenous in an Indigenous language it circumvents the whole discussion on how do we be good settler journalists. Perhaps, you know, like for me, it's writing a grant, twiddling the dials on Audacity to the best degree that I can, and what I found was this project, for example, allows for a far deeper exploration of cultural and life issues that are not even on our radar. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like we, as non-Indigenous journalists and folks, have a particular sort of like, even I think at the best of times, again, we're like, okay, well, the struggle, yes, and this is, it's a, of course it's an important component, but it's certainly like donning the camouflage, standing up at the blockade, fighting back against the police. You know, I'm all for it, but it's a you know, on a day-to-day basis, it's a fairly minuscule part of life, and that struggle to simply be alive is going to continue. You know, like, and what's that all about? I'm never going to know. Do you know what I mean? And it's not just by virtue of like not doing a good job or not going to go live in that community. It's just I'm not going to know. Like and I have to accept that, and I also have to accept that like decolonizing the media also involves an understanding that my simple presence, my simple like you know, the way I look may evoke understandably centuries of bad feelings, right, against somebody who looks like me. I might not have done anything particularly, but I have to just sort of hand the media back. So, and for example, what I'm talking about when we talk about ideas, issues, explorations, topics that would never be on my mindset, you know, we did a whole episode on the importance of language retention. We did a whole episode on the history of basket making and what that means to Mi'kmaq people. And you know, it's not going to be what, as a settler journalist, I'm not like, that's not at the top of my list of what I think about. And then just to follow up, when, you know, are we making radical media when we're talking about just making a podcast in Mi'kmaq? And I think the answer is yes, and it's an unfortunate answer, but you know, I'm drawn to a comment that you made the other day. I can't remember your name. Abujian.
Okay,
Abujian. I'm sorry. Where you said you didn't even know that there were still like, you know, Indigenous languages being spoken in this country. I don't think that's like, and we're here sort of as a, you know, as I think, you know, perhaps we consider ourselves to be sort of with a deeper understanding, and to not even know that these languages are still being spoken. I think that, yeah, simply creating a podcast of this nature where an Indigenous language, where Mi'kmaq is the language that's being used, is a radical act, because we have this history of like a terrible genocidal history in this country. And, you know, more recently we have residential schools as the most obvious, but, you know, where you have entire generations of Mi'kmaq speakers and other First Nation language speakers, children being removed from their families, indoctrinated into Roman Catholicism, beaten for speaking their language, forbidden from practicing ceremonies, traditions. So suddenly just making a podcast in Mi'kmaq does become like, let's make radical media, and even if it is just talking about basket making, it will go to even historical reclamation, etc. So if we're just looking at the language, there's just looking at Mi'kmaq as a language, there's just a few statistics here if you want to look. And just talk about maybe like who still speaks the language, how many people. And
To me, it's mostly the elders that are speaking the language. And it's spoken in the communities. When I was going to school, high school, in grade 9 to 10, there was language classes that I was going to. So if they didn't have that, I wouldn't be speaking my language right now. Instead of me taking French or English, I decided to take Mi'kmaq because I didn't want to lose it. So The elders are mostly the ones in the community that are speaking the language. And it's spoken to in the homes. So as soon as children leave the community, I find that that's when they start losing the language, because now they're getting involved in off the reserve, and now you got to learn English. And then when you go back home, you start speaking to your parents in English. So now your parents are speaking to you in English as well. They're not speaking to you in Mi'kmaq anymore. So that's the hard part when you go back home and then you're slowly losing your language. And of course your parents are going to have to talk to you in English because that's what you're coming home with. And you got to do your work in English. So, and there's some parents back home that will keep teaching their children and their grandchildren Mi'kmaq, but not all. Not all of them do speak the language. And what else?
We put a few examples there of like it's important to give shouts out to all the efforts that are being made to save the language as well. So you do have immersion programs for children in two of the largest reserves, Eskasoni, Mistigouche, and you do have our friend Savannah Simon has a hashtag Speak Mi'kmaq, and she does put like YouTube clips and little lessons and talking to her mom and her grandma, and these are awesome things to be doing, like social media. You do have a Mi'kmaq place names map that's online, like an active map where you can click, and the linguists have gone and interviewed elders to locate as many place names that they can still recreate on an active map of Nova Scotia. You do have digital language programs online. There are online translation services, and there's even an app on iPhones. Like I think it's just called Speak Mi'kmaq or Mi'kmaq app. And yet, even so, UNESCO lists the Mi'kmaq language as vulnerable, which, when you look at their listings, there are numerous languages that are critically endangered in the country. So, Mi'kmaq, with about 3,000 fluent speakers, is doing relatively well, and that should speak to like the danger that we're in of losing a vital cultural component of this country. It's the language of this land, literally. So
yeah, so we're not slowly, but fast. We're fast. There's a lot of people that are losing the language. So to me, I think it's really important to have high schools from nursery to kindergarten to grade 12 to have the language. So there's only 2 big reserves that are the only reserves that are doing that right now. And I just hope that all community reserves that have high schools and they teach the language, because there's not a lot of our kids that are speaking our language. You can talk to, like for my example, for my kids, I talk to them in my language. They understand, but they can't speak it. They try, and sometimes I'll have to tell them, well, I'm just going to speak Mi'kmaq, I'm not going to speak English, and then you're going to have to try to understand what I'm saying. So that's what I do to them. And they'll be like, why don't you just talk to me in English? My daughter's the one that's always gets really mad with me. She'll be like, why don't you just talk to me in English? No, I'm not talking to you in English because you're a Mi'kmaq girl, so you should be learning your language. She did. She was speaking fluent like me. But when I lived in Ottawa, I had a partner, and he was non-native. And I was speaking my language with my brother, and he lived in Ottawa, and I lived in Carleton Place, and he was always thinking that we were talking about him. And he got really mad with me, and I just said, okay, I'm not going to speak the language anymore, because he thinks I'm like gossiping about him or talking to him about my family, but that's how it is. Our people, when we go talk, when we get together, we speak our language, because that is what we're used to. So now my daughter doesn't speak it, and it's still inside of her, but I know someday that she will start speaking it when she's around our people that speak it 24/7. So if we do that with our children today, and they will get their language back, and they'll start speaking the language.
So we're just going to run through some of the challenges, and then the positives, and then without further ado, then we'll give a bunch of audio examples of what we did and how much fun we had, and at times how serious it got also.
Yeah. For the challenges, learning skills fresh in second language. Okay, for me, it's really hard because I'm influent in Mi'kmaq. So when it comes to English, I get really frustrated because in our language, there's words in English that we do not have. So when I try to translate here, because my brain works in my language, not English. So I have a hard time trying to translate English in my head. And whenever I get frustrated, I'll just start speaking my language. And then it'll clear it. And then I'll be all right. And then I'll try to try again and translate in English. So that's the hard part of me trying to communicate and trying to have skills to work two languages. The other, self-motivation, self-worth. Me growing up, I have been like pushed down, belittled, telling me, oh, you're not smart enough, oh, you can't do that, oh, no, you can't. So that's the part, that self-motivation. I try to motivate myself from saying, okay, I can do this. People can't stop me from speaking anymore. I'm an adult. So I got to believe in myself. And I got to put it in my head that I have to stop listening to people saying that I'm not worth it and I can't do this, but I can. The other one is cultural silence. It's like us being told that we're not allowed to practice our culture, our language, our traditional ways. That's another thing I have a hard time with, is that why can't we do that? Why can't we practice our traditional ways, the ceremonies, the smudging? And what else? Okay, so as a child, I was abused. And I tried to tell the social services what was going on. And they would tell me in my language, in English it means, would you stop lying? So for me, being treated like that since my childhood, I have a hard time trying to share and tell people things. Because right away in my head I'm thinking, okay, if I share something, or if I tell somebody, right away they're going to tell me that I'm lying and that I have to be quiet and that I shouldn't be saying anything. That's another thing.
One thing that I've noticed is that as a non-native person, as a white man in particular, you sort of it's very easy to just sort of occupy the audio space and just sort of oh, blah, 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 and what I find just sort of stepping back when I watch you, you'll just not say anything. Do you know what I mean? And that's it. It's it's if you don't personally just be okay, you know what I mean? And for all of us really, then we're gonna miss it, so there's that.
How will I explain? Okay, so the last one, it says, how will I explain to non-natives how I struggle and where I come from? So when I was a child, I went through a lot. And I think that's why some non-natives or settlers or whoever don't understand what my people are coming from, because the stories are not being shared. And the people are not being open. And sometimes maybe it's because they're scared to say anything. Like for the residential school. A lot of them don't want to talk about it. and they're just scared that to talk about it. And that is why I think that I should start doing that, start sharing stories and motivate them, and to see that like it's okay to talk about it. There's nothing wrong with talking about it, because once you start talking about it, that's where the healing starts. That's where it started from me when I started talking about my stories and being silent for a long time. So since I started this podcast, it's helped me a lot in healing from all the stuff that I went through, and talking about abuse or all the stuff that's happening to my people. Yes, I do talk about things that are very, very sad and heartbreaking, but I know that if I talk about it, it's going to make me feel good, and it's going to make my people feel good, and let them open up, share their stories, and share them to everybody, so that people that don't know about and understand what they're going through. So that's the last part. I will explain how, and then the other one is, oh yeah, I talked about that one already, translation. Working twice as hard to produce in English world. And for me, I need tools to learn how to cope in using English and Mi'kmaq together, and try to learn more, that I don't get frustrated or get upset or try to communicate with non-natives, because it's really hard. Just imagine my ancestors long time ago, they never even speak English at all. And for them to communicate, it was hard for them. And when I first moved to Halifax, it was really hard for me, because I wasn't used to like a lot of people. I wasn't used to like groups of like a lot of people around me, the noise. Going into like getting on a bus and going to one place to another, that was hard for me. Going and talking to people and for them not to understand what I'm trying to say, because my English is not that good. What else? Okay. All right, let's go to the positives then. The positives. Okay, so I am so grateful, because I wouldn't be able to do this if it wasn't for Marge and like what we're doing now. And radio stations, they go and put my podcast in there, and people listen to them in Restigouche and Halifax, CKDU, Montreal. Erin's radio station plays my podcasts. And if it weren't for my community, and if it wasn't for the people in Halifax, I wouldn't have been able to do what I'm doing now, because they motivate me, and they're proud of me, and they're like, you got to keep doing this, because this is really important. You're doing a great job. And there's even people from down here, the 60 Scoop. There was one guy that made a comment. He goes that you need to keep doing what you're doing, because people need to know these stories. Because he was one of the 60 Scoop, and it's just recently starting to be talked about, where the children are being taken from their homes, and then they're put into non-native homes, and then they lose all their culture, their language, where they're from. They don't even know who their families are, and that they think that they're Caucasian, but they're not. One of my friends is darker than me, and he was adopted to a non-native home, and they kept telling him that he was Caucasian, but he was brown than me. So the family members took him to the hospital, telling him that there was something wrong with him and he was sick or something, and that they think that he has yellow jaundice. The doctor went and told the family, no, your baby don't have yellow jaundice. You have an Indigenous child. So many things that And what else? No one else. And there's not a lot of people that are doing stories in Mi'kmaq language. And I think that it's really important that people start doing that. Because we communicate better. And they share their stories. What else? To inspire my people, the youth, the elders, single moms, single dads, for them to share their stories. Sometimes people will come up to me. There was this young guy, I was at Tim Hortons, and I noticed that he was really, really down. And usually when I go to Tim Hortons, he's always smiling and cheery. And I went up to him and I said, "What's wrong?" in English. And then sometimes he'll speak Mi'kmaq. I said, "I'm not really feeling too good. There are some things that are going on." And then he started sharing things that he never shared with anybody. Saying stuff that when he was a young child, that some things happened to him. And I just told him, "Well, if you ever want to talk, you know where to find me. Or if you like, I can go and find you." So people come to me and share things. So for me to do my podcast, I know that I'll be okay to go and share these stories because they're coming to me to share their stories. So another thing, which I help to say. And the reason why I want to do this because I want to save our language and I want our people to speak the language. I want them to go grab it and say that they will be able to speak the language, and that if I can do it, they can do it. Personal discovery of history.
I think that one was more surrounding when we were talking about moving to Halifax for the first time, sort of.
Oh. First time coming to Halifax and first time hearing about the history of residential school, the 60 scoop, and the murdered and missing Aboriginal women and men. I've never heard anything about that in my community since I've been living there till I decided to move out. And that was really overwhelming for me. I was so angry, so pissed off, so disappointed, because I've been living in my community for those many years and I didn't even know anything about it. Our community was keeping secrets. They weren't sharing these stories for a reason, because they didn't want people to know. Maybe it's because of guilt, shame, or fear. So for me, that was really hard. But after I thought about it and I said, I have to talk about these stories because they can't be a secret anymore. And people need to know what is really going on in our communities and where it's coming from and why it started. What else? Meet lots of interesting. Oh yeah, I got to meet a lot of elders, very knowledgeable people, very intelligent, and they gave me a lot of support, telling me, like for my elders, I would tell them what I'm doing, and they would be like, and they'll tell me in Mi'kmaq, well, lugan dan del lugan, asiaw dul lugan dan del lugan, at a delta kid ladigan dan dul lugan. Because you keep doing what you're doing because it's meant for you to do this and to share the stories that need to be heard. So getting feedback like that from my people makes me feel good, and I keep and I want to keep doing it. But the thing is that I have a problem with is struggling is when I go to people and the results that I get, like when they start saying, "Oh, you don't have the education," "Oh, you don't have the skills," but that's all gone because I do have the skills, and it's not really. I have the knowledge because I've been with my people since I was a child and growing up. Those are my skills, knowing what my people are going through and what they're struggling with. And
The other plan was to move to giving examples, like audio examples of podcasts that we developed. At times, these are very, very serious issues, right? And it can get, obviously quite painful to, and sometimes it becomes off-putting, right? And it's like, oh no, but humor, we use a lot of humor in what we're doing, and podcasting is such a fun way to do it, just because oral storytelling.
yeah, because my people are, they love using humor when something gets too serious. Because sometimes we get too serious, and there'll always be one person that'll try to like mellow everybody out, like get rid of that, and then we'll joke around and throw jokes and try to play around, and that's another thing we always have to add. Like, so now all that stuff that I talked about right now, I bet you guys are all, don't be like, because we have to try to make people feel like happy as well. Because sometimes it gets too serious and we need to joke around. And I did that to one guy in Kingston, one of the props there. He was older and he was walking too slow for me, and I'm like, geez, what's wrong? Come on, move it. And that's just humor, like just joking around with people. And then he wasn't used to that. So I told him, well, that's Mi'kmaq. You're going to have to get used to that. Humor is the thing that makes people like laugh or joke around. So we'll listen to a few things that are.
Okay, so I'll just, I'll bring these in. And so the first episode is episode 4, and what it is the importance of language, right? So we're living on unceded Mi'kmaq territory. The treaties that have been signed in the Maritimes do not give over title of the land. So it's where we're living, and so an episode on the importance of words and the power of words and what you name a place and what you even name the birds. For example, there's an interview with a man who simply feels empowered enough in his own language to rename birds that are beginning to migrate up because of climate change that have not been in the territory, and he finds new words for birds. And so the language continues to be dynamic, but without further ado, we have, I'll play the intro, and then what we have is we have Annie going to the Micmac Mall, which is like totally ridiculous if you think about it. It's like Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and you have like the colonial spelling, like, oh, you have a Micmac Mall, like, yeah, totally, like, being representative of First Nations culture in the area. And then running around the Micmac Mall food court with a recorder, kind of poking fun at like just people who know like so little. So
there's a theater in that mall, right?
Yeah, I think there might be. We spend most of our time in the food court, just like, so we'll load that up, and then we'll just load up a bunch of episodes now.
Oh my goodness.
Chili
that nigga 60 fourth episode, which is of Jalasi Migmani, will a bilingual English at Mi'kmaq podcast at Indeluisi and Clair. Welcome to the fourth episode of Jalasi Migmani, a bilingual English and Mi'kmaq podcast. I am your host, Annie Clair. Coming up on the fourth episode, we talk about words, Mi'kmaq words. There's power in language, and we will speak with Mi'kmaq language defenders, fighting to preserve our linguistic heritage. Niga 60 ki majuino West Coast Medish on Noel Wison. Tan no kiginao. Ning mo school medido, which tan deli on no way the medido make ma well Wison. To set the stage for this episode, I headed to Bunamu Badish, otherwise known as Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. For thousands of years, Bunamu Badish was a traditional stopping place for my people. Now there is a shopping mall named in our honor. I thought I would ask a few shoppers at the Mi'kmaq Mall if they knew any Mi'kmaq words or anything about our land and our culture. And here is what I stumbled across. Okay, there's not a lot of people that are in the mall today. It's Thursday, and I might have to go to the food court to go and ask some questions. Hello, sir. Do you have a few minutes to spare? I do bilingual podcasts in Mi'kmaq and English.
Okay, dear, yes.
So I wanted to ask you, do you know any Mi'kmaq words?
Unfortunately, I don't.
No?
No.
Do you know what Halifax is called in Mi'kmaq?
I don't know. I don't know that either.
No? It's Djibouti.
It's what?
Djibouti.
Ibuktuk?
Djibouti.
Oh, Shibuktuk.
Djibouti.
G.
Djibouti.
Yeah, my ears are not good.
Okay.
That's okay.
Excuse me, sir. Do you have a few minutes to spare? I have a few questions that I'd like to ask you. I'm a host and I do a Chulas Mi'kmaq podcast, and I have a few questions that I would like to ask you. Do you know any Mi'kmaq words?
No, I don't.
No?
No.
And do you have any friends that speak Mi'kmaq or?
I did have a few friends in the Navy that were natives, yeah, but I'm not sure if they were Mi'kmaq or native nations, but yeah, I had a few people.
Hi, how are you? I just wanted to know if you have a few minutes to spare. I was noticing your sign.
Yeah.
I'm a host and I do Chulas Mi'kmaq. It's a bilingual podcast that I do.
Sure.
So I was wondering, do you know why you guys call your store Mi'kmaq Smoke?
I suppose it's just because the mall is called Mi'kmaq Mall.
Okay.
So,
Do you know any Mi'kmaq language? Any words? You don't know one word at all?
nothing. I'm uncultured. No.
And you don't know the history?
The history? I know some Mi'kmaq history. I took a First Nations class in high school.
Do you know what it's called? Is it of Halifax?
The city of Halifax. For it?
Yeah.
No.
Djibouti.
Djibouti?
Yeah. Just walking around the mall asking people questions. So, do you have a few minutes you can spare?
Sure.
Do you know any Mi'kmaq words?
Me, just a tiny couple of words, like miigwech.
Miigwech is of Ojibwe and Cree origin and means thank you. Miigwech is not a Mi'kmaq word.
Or a quiz for a little boy, and I can't even think right now.
Do you know why they called the store Mi'kmaq Mall?
Because it's built on Mi'kmaq land, and the Europeans came over and took over the land, and they still built this mall on their land, and so I guess they felt that they should call it Mi'kmaq Mall.
Do you know why there's people that don't know about Mi'kmaq and why they don't know any language of the Mi'kmaq people?
Well, Yeah, unfortunately, I am a cause of that because my grandfather, he's Mi'kmaq and he's from Gaspé. It was they were badly treated in Quebec actually. If they were to speak their own language, they were told to only speak French. Grandfather said that they found out he had to protect his own land where they had land, and he had to protect his brothers and his whole family with a gun because they would take his kids away and put them in a school, a special school where it was called residential school. So they were always protecting themselves, and they had to hide that they were Mi'kmaq. So.
Do you think that they should change the name Halifax into Jibuktuk instead?
Yes, if it was the original name, of course, because it's not the original name.
And do you think that people know that?
No, because I didn't even know that.
So that was just a little segue, and then there's
My first guest on the show is Duma Young. Duma is a Mi'kmaq from Unamadi, otherwise known as Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. He's a lawyer and a professor at Cape Breton University. He's also a member of the Nova Scotia Bird Society and has worked for years to preserve the traditional Mi'kmaq names of Nova Scotia's birds. Duma Young naglayrit Unamadi. Ang nigamnudwadog sub eliador dumusi dan deliel nui doachik sisip kat jipjish. At dan deli alay nibuktu a akamajik sisip kizna jipjish a ang nui dwada. This interview is in Mi'kmaq, and if you don't speak Mi'kmaq, get your dictionaries out, people.
Lalu sini ni cuma yang tanya was malik wage. Clair ni band member ni eskisong. We ni gay Sydney. Hali elway ni Cape Breton University. Inamo natin. Nalaluya. Kesa naman sisi kalau desa ya kalau nak pun laki. People put kasi nemo na kesa dito.
Don't just start telling.
Mana samusa at is amish patsuweza.
So we had a funny interaction. We played this for some good friends of ours in Parsboro, and they're really fun people and really nice people. And we would play it, and then there'd be these like lengthy Mi'kmaq segments, and they would just sort of sit there like, "You should have Annie translate this into English. There would be lots more people that would tune in." And it's like, it's not like, and that's part of it too. It's like it's not for. Like, if you don't, it should challenge you if you're not speaking that language, and it's not for you. Like, you know what I mean? And that's like something like, we think everything is, it's for me. Make it easy for me to. Anyway, we were planning on keep bringing up different series, using humor to bring up different issues. So the next one was. We did an episode on traditional governance structures. As we know, colonialism has just wreaked total havoc on the East Coast and as well as all of North America. And so how things used to be, how folks used to govern themselves pre-contact is not necessarily lost, but there's been a level upon level of colonial sort of imposition, like layered upon that, so that how you get back to where things were and what that looked like is totally episode worthy, right? And so using humor to celebrate the lack of white people in an area is like another. It's a serious topic, but how do you? So we use the time machine.
Upjelida nagasisidumog 7th episode Uchid Upjelasi Mi'kmaq Ula Bilingual Mi'kmaq Adlasio podcast at Nindilwisi and Clair. Welcome to the 7th episode of Upjelasi Mi'kmaq, a bilingual English and Mi'kmaq podcast. I am your host, Annie Clair. Today on Upjelasi Mi'kmaq, we travel back in time. Let's just step into this time machine and set the date for 1000 AD. Push a few buttons here.
fun you can have with radio and podcasts.
Everyone all right? Now listen closely. Can you hear it? It's the sound of no white people. We're back to where we were. Muy mugandang siktaden. Morena gudamya udabatnwal. Muy mugandang madnusto. Mugandang siktovto. At mojijamakano. At mengat gente. Oh, kamnoji ulima. Desido? Desido gabni. Ay modi miyadan ay modi nagilu. Now we know what bothering us, for giving us diseases, for stealing our lands. We can look after ourselves. We govern ourselves. But what exactly does that look like? Good thing that Roger Lewis, curator of ethnology at the Nova Scotia Museum, is also here to explain things. Hi, Roger. Introduce yourself.
Roger Lewis, and I'm originally from Indian Brook, Shubenacadie.
Trying to understand the roots of our traditional governance. What can you tell me about pre-colonial social structures?
To answer that question, you're going to have to go back to the beginning of before the arrival of Europeans here. Understand how Mi'kmaq people lived on the land. In Nova Scotia, for instance, Mi'kmaq people would have been settled on 44 principal rivers in the province of Nova Scotia. Those principal rivers would have had, say, you would have been on one major river, I would have been on another major river. There would have been 44 autonomous family units on these rivers. Now, this is going back to pre-contact time. When you understand the settlement patterns of early Mi'kmaq people, you kind of get a better understanding of what social governance was like. Each one of these individual rivers had their head people, and of course it'd be a structure there. But we would have...
So, I'm just teasing you here. These are actually all available online, and they're half-an-hour shows. But, you know, we don't have time to listen to them all, but you should go online and listen to them all. One more example of humor, and then the next thing that we were going to talk about is, like, there's humor, and then there's also the ability of Annie as a Mi'kmaq journalist to not only be the depth and scope of the interviews that she was able to gather, you know, A, in Mi'kmaq, and B, from Mi'kmaq people who would not talk to non-Indigenous journalists in the same manner, and then, you know, obviously in English. Just making that very clear in three more sort of serious topics. So we'll do one more example of the humor we used. Yeah, that's where you can find them all. And this one was an entire episode on basket making, which at first, you know, seems kind of dry, but what you also see is that, for me, one thing that I noticed is, like, the language remains totally dynamic, because basket making was a survival skill after colonialism began. So a means to enter the capitalist society by making baskets, and you see like a whole variety of words begin to emerge around baskets. So you see the vibrancy and liveliness of this language sort of coming out, where if you don't have a word for something, you make it up. Like, and so that's the interview with Duma, that, like, I make up words for birds based on what they do. And so yeah. So here's one on basket making, and then we'll get into the serious stuff.
Welcome to the 6th episode of Jalasi Mi'kmaqi, a bilingual Mi'kmaq and English podcast. I am your host, Annie Clair. Ujjali 6th episode Ujjit Jalasi Mi'kmaqi, a bilingual Mi'kmaq Adlasiro podcast. Nindeluisi, Annie Clair. Coming up on the 6th episode, we talk about basket making. Mi'kmaq artists have become well known across Canada for their basket making skills. But it's been a long and complicated road between artistic respect and survival. We'll talk to non-native elders who remember the days of Mi'kmaq people going door to door in the Maritimes selling baskets.
There were Indians, whom we would now call Mi'kmaq, camped out on her father's property, which would be my grandfather. His name was Harris York, and that was here in Carsborough. And they were making baskets.
The first Mi'kmaq person I ever saw, I didn't really actually see him, because he was walking down the street in Kensington, PEI, with probably 35 to 40 baskets tied together. He was inside the basket.
Again, Rodas knew David Nigam Agunot, dan Delil do Ik Penigan, at dan Del Ginamwet, at Siawado tradition.
Well, then, Kisituan, Ga Adigay na bana affected wow. Ni beside me, sometimes muy dan glates, the swat is not sa oil like money, but a sa oil, not Penigan, like money.
We have many words in Mi'kmaq to describe baskets and the basket making process. According to the Mi'kmaq Online Dictionary, a basket is a
Lik Penigan,
the ash plates that make up the basket are called
Lik Petegan Nabi,
the hoops of the basket is called the
Lo Vista,
to pound the ash tree into splints we say
Elik Peteget,
when we cut strips of ash for basket making we say
El Dak Sewet,
we even have a word for tucking in the flaps while making a basket. It's
Gemak Jodok,
the language shows that basket making is important to us, but we haven't been making baskets forever. In fact, historians suggest that we only started making baskets out of trees such as black ash in the 1700s. Settlers were pushing into our lands, restricting our access to our traditional necessities. Our livelihoods were changing rapidly, and one of the few ways open to us to make money was to sell baskets to the settlers. For the rich American tourist, we made intricate fancy baskets. For the potato trade in Maine and Preserve Island, we made potato baskets. But let's start at the start. How do you turn a black ash tree into a basket? Let's listen to our first guest, Eldon Hanning, a Mi'kmaq ash harvester and a basket maker from Holton, Maine. Can you tell us your name and where you're from?
My name is Eldon Hanning. I'm from Holton, Maine.
Can you describe the process of preparing an ash tree for basket work?
Well, you split the wood, you split the log, like you would firewood. You know, you split the log to one, then you split that.
So Eldon goes on to describe exactly how to turn a tree into a basket. For me, that was a fascinating episode to make too, because in the research that we were doing, we found like just that, you know, there's Mi'kmaq people would travel to and set up camps around when things like let's say sort of going to the country, you know, actually became a thing. Like that wasn't always a thing you did. Like, you know, like I'm going on a little, I need to get back to the country, like as someone who had enough money to like be in a city and then go to a country to like to the country, quote unquote, to relax and partake of some fishing or whatever. Like that was born out of a particular time period too. And so Mi'kmaq people often became sort of guides for sport fishing and hunting adventures for non-natives to go on, but also set up camps around sort of resorts, which were also a new thing, and sold very intricate baskets for jewelry. And so what happened is, and we're quite renowned for the techniques of twisting ash, and you have a cousin who's like just amazing at making baskets, and you can see some of her work on the website too. But what happened is Roma people began to see that there was potentially some money to be made selling baskets to rich white tourists or urbanites coming to the country to get a country experience. And Mi'kmaq people began to protest against these lower quality baskets that were being made because Roma people were dressing up as Mi'kmaq people, selling, lower quality baskets. So it's now on the books. There's a law in Maine, in the state of Maine, that it's illegal to impersonate a native person because of that situation. So it's just like little, if you're geeky for history, like, you can learn a lot doing stuff like that. So anyway, that was a cool one. And so let's move to, there's episode 3 here, which is dealing with the reservation system. And this is sort of a serious topic.
Third episode, Jalasi Mi'kma'ki, Ula Bilingual Mi'kmaq Adlasiawe podcast, Anindilwisi and Clair. Welcome to the third episode of Jalasi Mi'kma'ki, a bilingual Mi'kmaq and English podcast. I am your host, Annie Clair. Coming up on the third episode, we talk about surviving the Canadian reservation system. We'll explore where we came from, where we are now, and where we're headed. Nige sixidumog third episode, sixidukik undo, and negamog saburidajik, undo egari tandel machipademilish reservation system. Coming up, we will be speaking with a young man from Millbrook First Nation, talking to us about his experience in urban life.
On the reserve, people fight with their hands, and they'll get in that altercation and they start swinging, and that's how they prove who's strong. But in Toronto, it's not like that. If you disrespect somebody the wrong way, you got a fist coming at you or a knife. At the worst case, you got bullets flying at your head. You know what I mean?
Nigga siksaduka everything lewi nigam ilsibuktu nigam agamukto dangoy nigam sabudai dat dangoy nebido onnoy gani.
People came down to do about nemigo said we mutton do tisi. What you do tisi drugs from Septamio sa adi of Septamio. Kids are young mirage wajan is sa adi gas of coil. Alcohol, dead gear and baby. Which was this molest of our juke. Boys and girls, what they want to give visualities. Because I don't want to never go in the coat with that radio visualities. Some days you would talk about visualities and go through the same thing I was some items doing.
So what we were going to do for this one is I was going to jump ahead to Mary Paul's interview, and then you were going to sort of translate into English what was happening simultaneously or at the end. Still.
What she was saying in Mi'kmaq was that she says that when I first moved in the community, the first thing I learned was to learn to smoke a cigarette. And she talks about how she doesn't like seeing what's going on in the community where people are just walking around drunk and there's needles all over the ground and there's children playing outside and the children can find needles and they're picking them up. And she doesn't like how the children are being treated, and whenever they go to school, sometimes they're going to school, they're hungry. She don't like it when people are out there, they're just fighting for drugs. They're fighting amongst each other with either about drugs or alcohol. And she talks about how the children are being molested in the community, and that she's been into certain homes and she's seen that, and that she's seen children being in the houses, left in the bedrooms, locked. She is really upset because she don't like seeing that, and it's just that she doesn't know what to do, and that she just wants it to stop, and that it's really sad. I think when I first recorded her, she was practically crying as I was interviewing her. So I asked her like if I can re-record her again. And she said, yeah, so I ended up putting this one because the first time I interviewed her, as she was talking, she was like crying. She had a hard time talking about it. So I ended up putting the second interview instead. So her talking about what was going on in the community, in the reservation, and what she's seen and she doesn't like seeing it. And there's a little bit more that she talks about. Like she talks about a lot. Like she talks about how the chief and council don't see what's going on and why aren't they doing anything about it, and they're being elected to help us, but they're not doing anything about it. And there's a lot that she's talking about, but no, it's all right. Because you guys won't understand my anyway, so.
We now have an episode that was devoted entirely to mothers of missing or murdered Indigenous women or men, and it just again goes to demonstrate the scope and breadth of the type of interview that I is again only sort of accessible to an Indigenous journalist, and again hence the importance of Indigenous-led journalism. So I can skip right to the actual.
You're listening to an interview with Miriam Saunders, mother of Loretta Saunders. Is a Mi'kmaq from Escanobritish First Nation, also known as Burn Church. She is the mother of Hillary Bunnell, who went missing while visiting friends on September 5, 2009. Hillary was 16 years old. Her body was found 2 months after she disappeared. Curtis Bunnell, her older cousin, was charged with her rape and murder. We spoke in June 2014. Pam began by telling me about the night she last heard from Hillary.
She had called me the morning that she was murdered. She called me at 3 in the morning. And I could tell, most teenagers at that age, they're all getting into a little bit of boom. And I could tell, And I said, Hillary, I said, you go home. Remember talking to Sherry? I asked her if she was okay. She said, yeah, I'm all right. Like, she was just joining a bunch of other teenagers. I could hear the kids in the background there. We ended our conversation. I said, I love you. She said, I love you too. And we hung up. I never heard from her again. I was living in Miramichi at the time. So when I came down to her church to look for her, I knew something was wrong that day. I just knew it. And you know something? That day that he killed her, I never went for a drive in Tax in so many years I couldn't even tell you how long ago it was that I went driving around in the woods of Tax. Just something that day I wanted to go, and I kept telling Fred, come on, let's go for a drive to Tax. Not even knowing the reason I was being put there because he murdered my little girl, and that's where she was put. So the call stopped, and they took my statement, and they said they'd get back to me. Nobody got back to me. No way. So then I called the police department, and I asked, is there any news on, what have you guys been doing to find Hillary? That officer said, oh no, this guy is handling it. You're going to talk to him. Then when I talked to him, no, this guy is handling it. It was like they were playing hot potato. So I got sick of it. And I'm not a stupid woman. I called the media right away. Because I know if I call the media, it's going to humiliate them and it's going to force them to do their job. Instead of just thinking, she's just another Indian girl out getting drunk, partying, and she go home. For me, that's how I took it. So then when the media got involved, that's when the police really had to start looking. And then it just kept getting bigger and bigger. so many, police officers and people, everybody looking. When we were looking for her, Curtis would even be there when they all went to, I think it was Quartier. He was even there pretending to look for Hillary. The last place she was at Spencer Jones. He told her she had to leave because he was going to the power. The police told me this is their scenario. They said, we believe that when Hillary left Spencer's and began walking, she comes to that first house. Well, Curtis was standing on that porch with a couple of guys. The police officer thinks that Curtis and the boys he was with were doing cat calls on her. She goes to the 4D store. You even see her when she's going down the hall. She's walking fast when she's coming out. Like she's just looking around as if checking to see if someone was following her. So when she lived there, just a couple minutes after, Curtis was in there, probably looking for her. So he went driving down to Burn Church, passed by Hillary on Burn Church Road going down 40th Road. He ended up going back, and Hillary's at the turn before the bridge to Green Bridge. And he says he picked her up over there. And from there, he took her to his place, and he beat her up and raped her. He put his hand over her mouth. He said to stop her from screaming. He killed her like that. Yeah. And he just would twist the story all over. He had like 3 different stories, and it's like, oh my God. Just constant lie after lie after lie. Curtis raped and murdered my little girl. In court, he was looking at pictures of Hillary, and it's her dead body he's looking at pictures of. Such a friggin' monster. Put his head up, and he's still able to smile and talk. And I was so disgusted. I said, look at him, looking at pictures of my little girl's dead body and putting his head up and smiling. That's a monster. And it made me cry, of course. But treating my kid like that was a dog they just ran over on the road.
Through all the ordeal that you went through since your daughter went missing in 2009, how were you feeling?
The doctor told me because of the stress of it all that I became a severe diabetic. Almost had a heart attack a few times. I was in intensive care probably 3 times. My organs were shutting down. Another time, I was on the verge of a heart attack. Another time, I couldn't stop vomiting. I don't even sleep in a bed anymore. I sit up on my couch every night. Every night I sit on my couch as if I'm waiting for her to come home. I haven't laid down in a bed in my own since she died. I don't know why I can't. I just sit up every night. And then I see the sun coming up and I realize I didn't lay down all night.
Was Hillary your only daughter?
She was my only child for the longest time. I have a 9-year-old now.
And how was Hillary when she was a young child?
Oh, she was a healthy girl. She was so funny. And my son, just like her. She loved to sing, dance, loved her friends. And then all this crap happened. But how the hell do you move on from losing your daughter in the most tragic way that a woman can die? He took her to his house, beat her, raped her, put her in his truck, took her to where his father's building is in Tavistock, right before you go right into the reserves. And Curtis said he took her out of the truck and he put her in the woods. Twisted so many stories around, tried to make her look so bad. I mean, shit, she was just a little girl. It's as if they wanted to blame her.
How long did the search take?
We started, she went missing September 5, and she was found November 10 or 11. I think 11 on Remembrance Day. But they only told me on the 13th. That's my husband's son's birthday, and he was so close to Hillary. Now every year on his birthday, he has that anniversary of my sister was found on my birthday. It devastated our family. Completely devastated. You know, when I was 16, I almost died the same way. And I never said anything.
What would be the message that you would want to put out there for other mothers?
They need to look at their kids and don't think that it can happen to you. Because I never thought it would happen to me. I really did. I see mothers on TV pleading for people to help find their kids. And I feel so bad for her. Now I am her.
You are listening to an interview with Pam Fillier, the mother of Hillary Bonnell.
Maybe with 20 minutes left, there's time to talk about all this if you want.
Give me a few minutes. I always say I'm not gonna cry. Each story I do, I'm connected with it. The first story was Loretta Saunders. She was from, she's Inuk from Happy Valley, Goose Bay. She was my friend. She got murdered. Pam Fillier, she was my friend from Burnt Church. I was part of the search when they were searching her daughter. The last one was Chris Metallic from Restigouche. I didn't know him that well, but I wanted to do 3 stories like Mi'kmaq females and Mi'kmaq male. So I found out that Curtis Metallic was just going to school in St. Thomas. Or was it? in Shediac. Sackville, I mean. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about 3 stories about murdered and missing Aboriginal women and men. So, like I said, sometimes there's some that has humor in it, and sometimes there's really difficult stories that I have to share. And some of them are my friends and some people that I don't know, but I'm still connected with them, and because they're my people. And I didn't know that it was Pam's daughter until I said that I had to go and be a part of it and go see if that I can help the family. So when I first went there and decided that I wanted to volunteer to go help and go searching in the woods, one of my friends I have a lot of friends in Burchurch. One of my friends said that I want you to go and introduce you to the mom. So she went and took me to the trailer, and as I was going in, she came walking towards me, and right away I knew who she was. And I said, I didn't know it was your daughter, and I'm really sorry. So from the beginning to the end, I was there for them, and I helped. And the person that he was talking about, Chris Bonnell, that was Hillary's first cousin. And he was a part of the search, pretending that he was looking for her. And all that time, he was part of it. He's the one that raped her and killed her. So at the end, they found that it was him that did that. His first cousin. So it could happen to anybody, really. It could even happen to from your uncle or your brother or anybody. So yeah, so it's really important that I share these stories, because there's not a lot of people that are sharing them, and there's not a lot of people that are going to be talking to just anybody. And I guess I'm the one that's going to have to do it, because some people, I don't think they'll be able to share or even do this kind of stories, because it's really hard and difficult. So yeah, so it's really important, and sometimes it's hard, but I got ways that I can just get rid of it. Not get rid of it, but go and get cleansed and go to my ceremonies and ask for help to make sure that I'm okay. And then I just go back and I do what I usually do. Go interview people and make podcasts. So I feel that I got to keep going and keep doing what I'm doing, and that my people's stories are shared. And thank you for coming. And what else are we going to talk about?
Other questions?
Anybody have any questions or?
Sorry, I came late, so probably you already explained this. Apologies. You already answered the question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so apologies if you already answered the question because I missed part of the story at the beginning. I was wondering whether you were always received positively by the community, or there were also people that expressed concerns or didn't like the idea or found the process of storytelling either too difficult or too kind of external to them, given the premises, what you explained, that it has been a culture that has been silenced for a long time. Mm-hmm. So to what extent has this been interiorized to the point that efforts of telling stories now are actually not welcome?
I've always got positive feedback from the people. There has never been negative feedback. And at the same time, as they hear these stories, it's helps other people to open up and motivates them to talk about what they've been holding on to all this time and that they've never shared it with anybody. So one of my friends was saying that it made her go back to the social services and get her file. Because I shared my story about me being a foster child, that I went back to my community and I asked for my file because I wanted to know where I was coming from and what happened to me as a child. So when I wrote that about myself, an article, she went back and she did the same thing. It motivated her and gave her strength to do what I did, to go and get her file and find out what happened to her as a child. And my brother seen the article and he was really upset and angry, saying that all that stuff they're saying about mom is not even true. And that he said, I'm going to get my file as well. I'm going to find out what they're saying and what they're doing, because what they're doing is not right. Because all that information they're putting on files, on each of our files, is not true. That our mother was not a bad person. So yeah, it's a lot of people are starting to open up and share stories when they hear this, and they motivate me and they like tell me, you're doing a great job and keep doing it and don't stop, because these stories need to be heard.
I was there when you went to go collect your file from the band office, and the social services manager, I'm not sure if I have the title correctly, who had gone to Fredericton to get, a thick file of what had happened to you since you were 3, we asked him, like, how many people come and do this? And he's like, nobody. So you have this, like, a systemic, child protection and child welfare on reserve is vastly underfunded. You have, it's not up to the provincial equivalent. It's also, there's colonial racism, so you've just got this process of removing children, and removal rather than rehabilitation of a home is sort of like the go-to mechanism of what you're going to do to a child and to a family. You're going to rip it apart, and you're going to put it often into a non-native home. And so, I can't even fathom the process of learning about myself through a stack of papers of where I had lived since age 3, and then simply, and then the guy saying, like, nobody even bothers. Like, one thing, an observation, if I may, moving to Halifax has its pluses and minuses, certainly removed from a Mi'kmaq speaking milieu and from a community, but maybe in the same sense gives a bit of a reprieve from what might sometimes be sort of a constant barrage of trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma, like on a daily basis, right? And so it may not be that people actually have the opportunity to be like, you know what, I think I'm going to take a week and figure out where I'm from. And I'm going to take that time to actually let this pass through me, and I'm just going to sit on the couch for a week if that's what it takes, and with a box of tissue and some chicken soup and cry about it. I don't think that is necessarily, when you're being faced with a constant, next, you don't have the opportunity to sort of where am I from? What has led me to this point? That introspection, introspection is almost like a privilege, you know what I mean? When you're being bombarded with new traumatic experiences. So maybe that's why, just thinking out loud, why people are not going to even learn where they're from, and what's happened.
Like I said, maybe I think it's from shame, guilt, and fear. That's why people don't want to share anything. But I know they're going to start. Because it's the time of healing for our people, to start healing and to move forward instead of moving backwards. Anybody else?
Okay. Well, first, thank you for your presentation. I think it's very important work, so I really appreciate. I really appreciate it. I would have many questions, but I don't want to take all the space. But just for one question, do you know and are you connected with other similar initiatives elsewhere in Canada? I'm thinking in Quebec there's one thing, it's not a podcast, but it's video, small video. It's called Wapikoni Mobile. So it's made up like in collaboration. It's made up with like Indigenous people, but in collaboration with white people. And they have like, they make videos, like they tell story, but it's not exactly the same thing. But my question is, do you know like other initiative or similar like this, and do you try to connect with them?
No, I don't know anybody that does what I'm doing, and but I do get some help from other, like Montreal. We have a friend that lives there, Franklin Lopez. Yeah, so we work with him every once in a while, and I don't know a lot of people that. It's just a certain places like Halifax and Restigouche and Montreal or Toronto that share my podcast, and that's it. And I don't know anybody else that does the thing that I'm doing right now.
I think that's part of, like why we're all gathered here. One of the great spin-offs is the networking and sharing of networks that we can do. So sure, I think just in the Maritimes you're often just sort of like, hello, like you're way, almost lost or something, like some different island or something. But yeah, it's still part of a.
Yeah, like I've noticed that I get a lot of support down here. Back home in New Brunswick, I don't get very much. Just certain people that help me, like Halifax Media Co-op and our friend Pierre. He used to work. He was working for the CBC, but now he went back again because he was off for a while, and now he's back, and he was the one that was helping me. So there was not that many people that are really.
It's a smaller community of media makers. Like it's fairly small.
Yeah, in New Brunswick. So since I came here, I was like, wow, there's a lot of people here that are doing media and doing all these things that are doing with podcast and radio. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether you thought about a special version of this for children. Because this sounds like something that, if you empower the very young ones,
yeah.
Also in terms of linguistic, I don't know how many children now speak the language.
Some do, but not all.
So this could be also a vehicle for preserving the language, but also involving them in their heritage, right?
Yeah.
Something which is not that far away, but if they've never been exposed to. Because it's not something that is talked through in the community. This could be a vehicle for doing that. It's just an idea, but it sounds like very powerful because it's very, very intense storytelling.
Yeah.
Which seems to have the ability to involve them as well. Just a suggestion.
All right, thank you.
Just to echo what Stefan said about Wapikoni Mobile in Quebec does a lot of really good Indigenous-led. It's film, but and they do some focus on language. And then also someone in the Montreal area that also focuses a lot on language is Ellen Gabriel. She's involved in. Lives in Ganasatagi, the Mohawk community.
Okay.
And she teaches and makes books in Ganegahara, the Mohawk language. So not Mi'kmaq, but similar, and builds resources to, like, language resources there. Frank Lopez probably knows Ellen.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. Franklin knows everybody.
Yeah. And Ellen's involved in the UN and all sorts of stuff, so she might be someone to connect with.
Okay, thank you. Anybody like to say anything else? How they feel about the stories and as a woman?
I live right around the corner on a farm.
Okay.
And for the last 8 or 9 years, I've been obsessed with community gardening. So growing food with people in the community and growing and saving seeds, native seeds, and connecting. In the last few years, we've been connecting with local Indigenous communities around Aurelia through the Aurelia Native Women's Group. Some of them led the opening ceremony on Thursday, where we gathered out at the gardens here on campus. And so this will be the third year. On June 1st, we're going to have a ceremonial Three Sisters garden planting. And on the same day, planting a medicine garden with native plants. And we were talking about signs in the garden and how to represent the plants and what. And one idea that came up was that we should just do Ojibwe plant names with traditional uses in the gardens with permanent signs, without English translations, without English signs. And it was the first time that had occurred to me. I was thinking that we may do both so that people could know both, but then I thought what it might be like just to have the Ojibwe names there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That would be great.
And so the seeds that we've been planting, we've been gifted the seeds from traditional seed keepers, and then I've been given seeds on my adventures, my journeys, and I got some seeds in Winnipeg from a grandmother there, who got them at an Indigenous Farmers Conference in Minnesota, from traditional seed keepers of the Miami Nation in the state currently known as Indiana. And they had been growing these seeds out in isolation for potentially thousands of years. And they grew this, in Ojibwe they call it Gite Okosumin, meaning ancient squash. And the squashes were these huge squashes. And so that's kind of my connection to the language and to the culture, is through the seeds and through the food and through the relationships there. And in the last year, they created an Indigenous community gardening collective they call Ambe Tigada in Ojibwe, meaning let's grow together.
Oh, wow.
And last year we had a Three Sisters planting tour where we started here at Lakehead. We planted Three Sisters garden. It was also the same day that the Truth and Reconciliation report was released. Mm-hmm. And we had survivors of residential schools there. And we were trying to create a new narrative around coming together and using the Three Sisters garden. People are familiar with that Indigenous agricultural technique of planting the corns, bean, and squash together, and they grow better together. Awesome. And so this was a metaphor, a literal metaphor as well for how our communities can come together and support one another. Mm-hmm. And we traveled to different sites, and we ended up at the Rama First Nation and did a round dance around the garden, and it was incredibly powerful, symbolically, and as the gardens grew, so too our communities growing, and we saved those seeds and saved those stories and are able to start new gardens. And so I just wanted to share that because it's been transformative for me.
All right, thank you for sharing. Yeah, and seeds too. All right, because we love gardening.
I just want to thank thank you for being here, for your time, and I just want to like honor the work that you're doing, and whether it's intentional or not, like I feel like just you being here is like educational labor, and like this is not something that should be imposed on you, but the fact that you chose to share your stories in this way also makes it so that someone like me can listen and learn. And like I just wanted to honor that and to thank you to be here, to sharing like your stories and helping us be better at like supporting one another and at coming together, because I feel like this is part of like what has been done today, at least for me. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Walalin. Yeah, Walalin. And I'll see you again. Up no move this.
In my language, Walala means like friend or like sibling. So
that's amazing. It's almost the same.
So just to end on like good news, we got I mean, I don't know if it's good news, but I think it's good news. Like we're sort of going into academia, and you know, I don't know if it's bad or good, but we decided to, you know, people have really been receptive to this as a medium and as a respected medium, rather than just sort of you know, the conventional routes that you enter into education and stuff like this. So I mean, people at Queen's University, for what it's worth, have offered a place to Annie in the master's program and really rolled out a full sort of team to welcome her there and make sure that that's a huge success. And I think I know that the strength of the podcast in terms of like what and you know, respecting that as valuable learning tool, like you say, has been seen and heard by a group of, you know, stuffy ivory tower type folks, maybe to a greater or lesser degree. So anyway, like it is moving in a direction, you know, it is being sort of seen as something to be acknowledged and respected and taken at real value. So that's in the near future. So
one day I'll have a radio station. That's my goal.
And a degree, for what it's worth, you know. Like, and it can be worth something. So.
Yeah. So yeah.
So thanks a lot. And
thank you for coming. Like, it doesn't really matter if there's like 100 people here. There's like a few people here, but that's what counts. Even one. If only there was one, that it will be passed on. So, thank you for coming and listening. And have a good night. Sweet dreams.